Jeremy Stanley, founder and CTO at Anomalo and previously VP of Data Science at Instacart. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast. Long time coming.
Yeah,
well, I guess I had you in my other podcast back in O'Reilly days.
That's right. Yeah, it's been a few years back.
Yeah. So, of course, first question is, you were VP of Data Science at Instacart, and I am surfing the Anomalo website as we speak, and I see it's about data validation and data quality. So, Jeremy, what possessed you to go from the cool data science world of fancy models and stuff like this to data quality and data plumbing?
Yeah, no, great question. So, I've been a data person for a long time, and I've worked on data in everything from insurance applications to advertising technology to personalization to all of the logistics and fun challenges at Instacart. And if you work with data long enough, you begin to appreciate that all of the fancy things that you can do with machine learning and generating insights, they're all only as good as the quality of the data going into those processes and into those models. And I often found myself either personally or with the teams that I was working at in these different companies building solutions in-house to be able to monitor the quality of the data that we were depending upon. Because we would have, at Instacart, we would have things that could be pretty embarrassing. There was a table we were using to launch new markets from. And that table was based upon people coming to our website and trying to sign up and putting their zip code in. And that table got switched and stopped being updated, and yet we were still making decisions on it. And so for 6 or 9 months, we were using stale data about zip codes that we'd already launched, and people had long ago been requesting, ignoring all of the new city expansion we were doing. And it cost us a lot of growth. That was probably fixing that data quality issue was one of the biggest things that we did for growth in my tenure at Instacart. And this is along with my co-founder, Elliot. And then you have the machine learning applications where all of a sudden, features can change their distribution, null values can creep in, and your model in production starts to make wild predictions that can cause a lot of problems, for your customers, for your risk profile. And so having seen that this is a problem that really prevents organizations from staying data-driven and being successful as a data-driven organization, and that there were no good technologies for it, it was a pretty solid place to think about building some technology and a startup around it. And in the end, I'm pretty passionate about data, and the idea of creating a technology that can monitor and assess the quality of anyone's data is actually intellectually a really interesting challenge. Right? This technology has to go and run against an arbitrary data warehouse. It could be a e-commerce company with hundreds of millions of customers. It could be a financial services company. It could be a real estate company. The data is going to be wildly different. The challenges are very different, and so it is an interesting technical challenge to take on.
By the way, I have good news for you and your co-founder. We just completed a data engineering survey, close to 400 respondents. And one of the questions we asked them to rate, so what are the key challenges you have? Number one was data quality and validation.
That's right. That's 100% right.
By the way, going back to data science and ML, so here's something I tell new data scientists. I say, you spend a lot of time in school learning about modeling and things like this, but the reality is in your day-to-day job, what you'll soon find out is the modeling part is a fraction of your time. And secondly, at what point, Jeremy, do you just tell yourself, okay, I've built 20 classifiers, this is no longer interesting, right? The more interesting thing is making an impact on the business side. And honestly, these days too, I've been doing a lot of NLP lately, and the problem is, it's not that you don't have any models, there's actually thousands of models. What you need is to be able to tune these models for your application, and because most of these models are general purpose in nature, right? So
yeah, no, it's a great segue and kind of transformation to think of, or evolution to think about. In the beginning of your career, you're enamored with the science and the magic of, you mean I can take this data and I can make predictions about the future? Like, whoa, mind is blown. And oh, there's this whole deep learning, framework that totally expands what we can do with machine learning. And I still get that zing of excitement from those things, but it definitely no longer like, motivates me or drives me or consumes as much of my focus or energy. And so you then transition to what you were talking about. I've got a business problem. Wait, now, actually, a business problem is almost all about how do you define the objective and how do you measure the objective and how do you source the data, and the actual algorithm is just a component of that. And so now you're solving this like very complex, multifaceted real world problem. Then you put that into production, and now it has to be sustainable. And it has to last. It has to keep working day in and day out, not on the data that you trained it on, not on the data that you analyzed, but on the data that's coming in off the wire. And I think that's really, once you get to that level of maturity and experience, is where you start to really appreciate data quality.
By the way, on your website, you use a buzzword. By the way, by the time this comes out, I'm writing an article on this topic actually with my friend at Intel Capital, Asaf Araki, on low code and no code. So you folks use this phrase no code. So
that's right.
How no code is Anomalo?
Yeah, well, so that's great. Great question. So there's a couple of layers to that. So the first one is we try to use intelligent approaches. They're machine learning in our systems and time series models and other algorithms that can automate as much of the data monitoring process as is possible. So as soon as a user configures a table and says, I want to monitor this table, they immediately get smart validations that are going to detect, is this data fresh? Is the volume of data what I would expect? Are there any surprising new increases in missing data, any segments of data that have dropped out?
So first off,
in distribution.
First clarification, Jeremy. So Anomalo is not just batch in the sense that data at rest. So you're ongoing monitoring the data.
Yeah. So the expectation is you have data that's being updated, appended to, updated in place, dropped and replaced, different styles of updating data in a cloud warehouse. So our customers typically are Snowflake, BigQuery customers, can be Presto or Athena or, Azure Synapse, other platforms, mostly BigQuery and Snowflake. And they've got data they care about that's landing in there all the time, and they want to monitor that. And so you go in, you say, I care about this table, I want to monitor it. And right out of the box, Anomalo is going to start monitoring for all of the most common failure cases we see. And it doesn't require any configuration from the user.
So what's the UX, and who's is the business owner or the domain expert doing the monitoring, or is it still IT doing the monitoring?
Yeah, so the UX, we pride ourselves in the ease of use of our interface. In fact, we've had customers say that's a big part of why they've chosen us. We also pride ourselves in that we include a lot of visualizations in what we do, a lot of rich visualization. I love visualizing data. If you follow my blog post at Instacart, a lot of them had very rich visualizations, and then we bake that into the product. And so everything comes with rich visualizations that help provide context and insight. And so users are in the Anomalo platform to configure, to check the status of things, but then we also send notifications to Slack or to Microsoft Teams, when issues happen in the data.
So what personas are you targeting?
Yeah, so it can range from the data platform team at a company, who might be the first company, the first part of the company that is selecting this and configuring it. Data engineers, who obviously care a great deal about timeliness of data arriving in the warehouse and about the completeness of that data. And then on up through your data scientists and data analysts, your machine learning engineers, technical people in the organization that depend upon the data, and then all the way up to product managers and to operation experts, people who care about the insights coming from the data, or are tracking experiments related to the data, or other metrics related to the data, and want to identify meaningful changes or anomalies happening in the tables that they care about.
So I'm using Anomalo, but I happen to be, I have a role where I'm sourcing data from multiple warehouses and lake houses, right? So what's my what's my dashboard, so to speak. So what's my entry point for Anomalo if, I'm actually not just interested in this one marketing lakehouse. I'm interested in marketing, finance, so on and so forth, right? So
yeah, so when you first land in Anomalo, you actually see a homepage that has a search experience that will include every table, every view, every queryable object in the organization. And so as an organization, you can set up multiple different warehouses. You can set up the warehouse, same warehouse, multiple different connections and credentials. And we have an infinite scroll of all of the possible tables and a great search and filter experience that allow you to get down to whatever it is, whatever data in the organization that you want to be able to access. And then we have a teams concept within Anomalo, and organizations even within Anomalo. So we have some companies where the data privacy is incredibly important, data sensitive, very sensitive data, and so they will have walls in their organization where some people can see the trust and safety data, or the PII fraud related data, but nobody else can. And so there are those kinds of walls that could be put in place, and then you can have team ownership of data and team specific notification destinations that allows you to kind of cluster and be able to also easily navigate to data and understand ownership.
So Jerry, what's the overlap between what you folks do and what people are trying to do on the data discovery, data catalog side of things? Because you mentioned the word search, right? So.
Yeah, no, great question. So, search is an important part for us because we are a configuration tool for going in and setting up monitoring of all of this data. And there is a close connection to data discovery in that, if there is a table that's really well monitored. So I talked earlier about all that automated monitoring. So you can set that up on hundreds or thousands of tables. But there's also a very low code approach in Anomalo to add a key metric or to add a validation rule. And track that key metric for anomalies, ensure that that validation rule is always true, get lots of insights. And so if I'm a user and I'm looking for a table that's related to orders at Instacart, I might find the fact orders table and see that, oh, there's actually 30 different validations and 15 different metrics being tracked on this, and everything's passing and this looks green. That's a big vote of confidence for me as a user.
Yeah. This is exactly, so the data discovery tools, not only do they help you find the data, they help you try to understand, is this data worth using?
That's right.
Right.
So we have a big part of that story. That being said, that this has not been our focus, right? Being a data catalog and a data discovery destination, we're much more focused today on data quality and being able to assess and understand that. And so we have close integrations and relationships with other data discovery, data catalog tools where our customers are using them. And through our API, it's easy to move data back and forth. It's easy to cross-link these platforms. And so our philosophy today is let's be very open, and if a customer is using other platforms, let's make sure that the data can be exchanged.
By the way, as you've been speaking, it just occurred to me that really what we're talking about here is data ops or ops. So as many of our listeners know, when I talk about ops, I usually think about three things, right? So monitoring, automation, and incident response, right? So how quickly can I fix something wrong? Because basically, yes, we live in a complex world, so we know things are going to go wrong. It's just a question of how quickly can these tools lead me to fixes, and how much can automation handle some of the fixing, right? So.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. And we definitely have customers that are trying to push the envelope in automating, the repair of data. It's interesting. I think that insofar as you control the system of record, automating fixing data is kind of the wrong metaphor, the wrong approach. You want to go in and fix the system of record. You want to prevent the origination of bad data. But in a lot of cases, you don't own the system of record. This data is coming to you from third parties. And you're just subject to whatever changes are happening in those. And that's where I see the automated repair of data as being an important component. One really nice thing about Anomalo is we're not just testing a metric. or testing some specific rule. We're actually looking down into the data itself, evaluating the rows. Doing this in a scalable way, we do a lot of sampling, right? If you've got a billion rows a day, as many of our customers do at a table, you don't need to analyze all billion to understand significant issues. So we can do sampling and get down to the row level. Now, what that means is we can tell you exactly where the issue is occurring and do analysis to identify, well, what characterizes where the issue is occurring. And so a very common issue is that this field is broken or this metric has gone awry, but it's not across the board. It's happening just in Android, just in the most recent release. Now, if I'm a data scientist and I get a failure that's I've got 10,000 bad records, and it's up to me to go into a table with 500 columns and figure out where this is happening, it's actually a very expensive thing to do. And so we do that in an automated fashion.
That could take a data scientist a few days.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And when we show our customers that we can do this in an automated way and tell you exactly where this is failing, it's in iOS, it's in this release number, or it's in this geography, or so this provider type. I've had customers go, that's like a third of my time. It's a pretty amazing thing to be able to automate. And then that allows them, like you were saying, you can get to the root cause faster. It means you can identify the fix faster, get it in place faster. Customers don't notice, you don't have data loss, right? You save a lot of time and energy. So speed can really matter in this.
By the way, so, the data engineers and machine learning engineers, right? So when they deploy a model, something starts going wrong. A lot of the times it actually ends up being some kind of pipeline involved that's causing some of the problems, right? So, so I imagine your tool can help me diagnose or chase down what's wrong with my pipeline at some point, right?
That's right. Yeah. And the way many people think about monitoring pipelines is monitor each step. And so monitor this, transaction or this transformation, monitor this system, the completion of that job. I've got monitors on all of the individual components. I should be good. Well, anyone that writes code knows you can unit test each function and still put together a piece of software that doesn't work.
Right.
And it's the same thing in pipelines. They're complicated. These DAGs, they're like spaghetti, and it just naturally ends up becoming very complex. And so one of the things that I really
and by the way, Jeremy, before you continue, I mean, there's one thing to do the unit test, but then in a pipeline, usually when you start doing the integration testing, now you're touching multiple distributed systems. It becomes complicated. Some of them are writing something to somewhere, right? That's right. Well, one of the nice things about the modern cloud data warehouse is increasingly now everything lands into the warehouse, right? It lands there in its very raw form. It lands there through the transformation lifecycle, and then the final, OLAP aggregates or whatever, fact tables, whatever it is you're ultimately dependent upon are there. And so one of the things I like about our positioning and framing is we're connected right to the warehouse, and we are testing to the quality of that end product that is the same set of data that your machine learning model is depending upon, or that your data scientists or decision analysts are using in their dashboards and analytics work. And so, that can really protect you from missing the forest for having monitored each tree. I want to give a shout out to the Lakehouse, since I'm an advisor to Databricks, and I helped them kind of refine that Lakehouse concept.
Yeah. I love all of the water and lake metaphors. I do find them somewhat confusing. So I'm curious to see where it all ends up.
So let me ask you about some of the challenges of building a solution like this. So I imagine false positives is one of these things that you have to guard against. So what else? Well, I guess the other thing you mentioned is, it has to be somewhat general purpose. You can point it to something. So basically this thing has to work somewhat reasonably well out of the box on data it's never seen before, right?
That's right. Right. Yeah. So those are two really important pieces. The false positives is the most important, trade-off that you think about in monitoring. And the way that most people end up doing this is they'll start out writing a bunch of tests, in code by hand, trying to, be very explicit about exactly what shape they want their data to be in. And invariably, as those tests go into production and as they grow, they start to throw alerts that are false positives, because the test Was it written correctly? The range wasn't set correctly. There wasn't the right where filter. The business changed or evolved. And so inevitably, as companies do this, they end up with alert fatigue, and that causes back pressure, and they monitor less, which actually ends up with the false negatives. And now you have issues that you don't know about that are causing downstream effects. And so balancing that is super important. And it's a combination of, you need to use algorithms, right? This can't all be deterministic testing, because data is not deterministic. I think about, if you're going to monitor your code is pretty deterministic, and your tests should be deterministic. Monitoring infrastructure, well, infrastructure is more chaotic, and networking is more chaotic. You need to have more sophistication there. Data is like another order of magnitude more chaotic, right? Because data is this incredibly multivariate entity that's being influenced by your product, by the world, by your code changes, by your pipeline changes, by individuals going in and pushing a button in a system. And so the opportunity for false positives is much higher, and you need more sophistication there. So the algorithms is a component of it. And then there's just a lot of best practices. So for example, our bigger customers, they might have 20 different notification destinations, different channels in Slack that people are opting into because they care about that data. And so being able to segment out so that you don't have to sit in the channel seeing notifications that you don't care about. And then having intelligence in the notification process. If the check is failing multiple times in a row and it's not a really high priority check, you should automatically suppress that and not continue to send that notification. And then making it really easy for your customers to go in and edit and configure and change things. And so that it can be the business analyst who can, through the no-code system, change the configuration instead of having to submit a ticket to an engineer.
So Jerry, so obviously we both like machine learning and stats, and like you said, models help a lot in terms of detecting data quality problems. But where do you fall under? Obviously there's also domain knowledge and years of experience of seeing this data. So where do you guys fall into being able to blend in some of that human knowledge and helping the models, right? So
yeah, it's critical, Ben. And in the beginning, we started out with the machine learning approach because we knew that was an important way to make this scalable, and it's a foundational element to what Anomalo does, that you get a lot of this monitoring out of the box for free. But there's no free lunch. The machine learning algorithm that's detecting drift in the data, it thinks every column is equally important. It thinks every row is equally important. But in fact, that's not the case. So that's one of the hard lessons I learned, is that many companies collect a lot of data, and 90% of which they know nothing about and care nothing about. This is just it's easier to collect data than it is to understand it or use it or care about it. And so what we've done with Anomalo is you get that base layer of coverage without having to do any effort. And then we make it really easy in just a couple of clicks to go in and add any of 100 different types of rules to attest to the data. This time column must be within this window of another time column. Or these two tables should have this relational structure with one another. Or this string column should never have any new values appear in it. Let me know if it does, or none of the values that exist there should suddenly drop out. And so you can be very explicit in just a couple of clicks to say, I have this domain expertise. This relationship should be true, and I want to enforce that. And then you can also identify key metrics. It could be a business metric, sales growth. It could be profitability. It could be time to some event, or it could be a data quality metric, right? The percentage of time this is null or missing or negative or something like that. I just want to track that as a time series and tell me if there's ever an anomalous change in that time series. And so that's where our users, and it really becomes distributed in the organization. Different teams will be able to come in with their relevant domain expertise and apply that on top of the base layer of coverage.
So how old is the company?
So we're a little over 3 years old now.
Okay, so at this point, I guess in our survey, we found actually companies found the data quality validation to be their top challenge, but there's actually a big chunk of companies who don't have any solutions.
For sure.
So what has changed since you founded the company? I mean, is there more awareness, number one, and Are there more companies open to a solution like Anomalo? Have they tried building their own? What's the situation since the start of the company?
Yeah, when we started this, Elliot, my co-founder, and I, we were both in Instacart together, and we knew there was this burgeoning trend towards this modern data stack, and the ability to land all of your data in one data warehouse and then expose that to everyone, right? So anyone in the organization can execute SQL, can build products on top of it. It really becomes central in the value proposition. And we also knew from our experiences at Instacart and other companies that everyone that was going to build that was going to end up with a bunch of data quality issues. And so when we began this, the people that had been at a data-driven company and using maybe legacy technology, using Hadoop or using other MVP systems that were legacy, they'd experienced this. They knew it was going to happen, but it wasn't the majority of people. The majority of companies were still working on building their data stack, or they had built it, but they hadn't used it yet. And so you can have an amazing data stack and collecting all this data. And I talked to customers 3 years ago, and they said, I don't have any data quality problems. And I was like, oh, you mean you're not using your data? Which is the reality, right? They just didn't know it. Today, and we're obviously, we have some customers, Fortune 500, companies that I think are leaning a little bit more sophisticated in their use of data than the average Fortune 500 enterprise. But most of our companies we talk to are inbound. They read our blog posts, they hear about what we're doing. And so by the time I get on the phone with them, or our sales team gets on the phone with them, they've got a pretty clear understanding of the problem. They know they need something to address it. And they may even be sophisticated about the landscape and the different solutions. They might have tried to build something themselves internally, maybe using open source software or something they wrote themselves, and be struggling with that, and see the same kinds of struggles reflected in the content we produce or that others are talking about.
At some level, this is one of these things that on paper, if you think about it, right? So, oh yeah, I can build something like this for our warehouse because I know machine learning and stats. But then once you get into the nitty-gritty detail of, wait, so I also have to maintain this. I have to make sure it works well. I have to make sure that it actually, if we have another system, I can point it to, it works just as well there. And by the way, there's also the UX, and it's just too much, I think.
That's right. And one of the things that I think makes, any SaaS platform can be that way, right? Every SaaS platform needs role-based access controls. And every SaaS platform is going to need, some different authentication mechanism that's going to be idiosyncratic. I think what's interesting about data is, there's a whole bunch of computational concerns around data. There's the algorithmic concerns around working with it. And then there's the UX visualization component. And I think it's easy to underestimate how much that matters. If I get a notification that says this table is broken in this column, it's just not terribly useful. And so you really, in order to make this scalable, something that's sticky, something that people want to use, it needs to be well designed. It needs to be able to speak to people about the data in a very quick and efficient manner.
So you folks have been at it for 3 years. So describe a few success stories. You don't have to name the companies, but some good use cases. Yeah.
It's funny, just this morning, we were with a customer that's in a pilot, and they've been live for a week. And this is what I love to see. And they showed us an example that happened today, where there was an SDK release that caused a sudden spike in an activity that should not have occurred. Our system spotted that specific activity spiking, sent them a notification. They made a fix that day and resolved it. And this is something that would have taken weeks to have been found otherwise. And so it's those kinds of stories when they're able to find a real issue and fix it shortly after deploying the software that always gets me really excited. But the kinds of companies we work with pretty vary. There are big financial services, credit companies, payments processing platforms that are using our software. Tons of transactional, rich customer and financial transaction data flowing through them. We have a lot of companies in the media world, where they are publishing content or have a social media platform that content's being created by users. And so you oftentimes there have thousands of different types of events that can occur that are very important. You want to make sure you're not dropping any of those events or they haven't spiked in unusual ways. You want to make sure that the activities happening through funnels are occurring in the correct order and correct frequency. So lots of interesting observations there. We'll have other customers in e-commerce. It's another very common application. It's always funny when you have customers buying products for $. And what does that mean as an example? Or suddenly at Instacart we would have situations where you could not buy bananas that had been dropped out of the catalog, which would be a serious customer concern.
By the way, Jeremy, so one of the things you mentioned earlier is that obviously one mega trend is more people inside the company are using data. Right. So by definition, then more people inside the company care about data quality, right?
That's right.
And so data quality is no longer kind of something that you kind of just assume your IT people are taking care of.
Yeah, that's right. And it's this difference between, a legacy world where the amount of data that the organization maintained and captured was very closed and constant, right? You had fixed, database storage costs, and everything was in this very nice schema, and you could do this master data management and say, we have it all. So long as our business doesn't change, we've got it controlled. To the world we're in now, where data is just flying into the warehouse from so many different sources. Every SaaS vendor a company uses, is going to have an export of data that you want to put into your data warehouse. Every tool that you end up using, you're going to want to leverage data in a way to affect that tool's behavior. And so there's just so much diversity of sources and consumers, and it's really that those two kind of multiplicatively, I think, expand the need and the concern about data quality.
So, Jeremy, a lot of what we've discussed happens to be in warehouse, lakehouse world, right? So, obviously, in the lakehouse architecture, you also have unstructured data. Yeah. So, at what point do companies start also having solutions for data quality for their unstructured data?
Yeah. So, the first layer is definitely all the structured data. Below that is JSON, right? And right. Data that you haven't an explicit structure for, but it's still business data that could be structured. And so early on, one of the things we did at Anomalo is we automatically expand JSON. And so we have a recursive algorithm that will go through and navigate the JSON tree and explode it out so that we can identify if a specific key has gone missing, or if an array length has changed, or the values in an array have changed. And so
these modern data platforms can query JSON directly, right?
They sure can, but they require that you know exactly what you're looking for. You have to specify the path, right? I want to go from this key to this array element to that key to this element. And what we've done that's really innovative is take the whole JSON blob, the whole JSON document across maybe 1 billion records, and be able to automatically explode the whole thing out and analyze any changes in the leafs of that JSON document. And that can be pretty powerful because you don't always want to invest the time to structure everything into a final table. And yet you may have dependencies deep in that JSON in terms of your business logic or machine learning, and you want to be able to test for changes there. So we've definitely gone down to that layer. I think then below that, you have what I would call truly unstructured, either text or images. And that's not been a focus for Anomalo at this point. Definitely something I could see us doing in the future. And we definitely have customers where they have lots of metadata about documents and about images that we're monitoring.
So in terms of in terms of the future of data quality, so where does data quality go? Does it start becoming does the data quality solution also take care of repair, like you hinted at earlier? So where do these data quality solutions go?
Yeah, so I think there are cases where you can do automated repair, but I would say in the vast majority of cases that I see with our customers, it's not possible. And the reason I say it's not possible is because it requires, from the digital world into kind of the wet logical world of, well, how exactly were the processes designed to collect this data, and what went wrong? you have to do that assessment in order to understand how things should be changed. And in many cases, the answer is not that the data can be repaired, it's the data is being lost or irreparably corrupted. And so therefore, the only way to fix that is to fix that at the source or generation process. I would say the repair is more common when you have external dependencies that you can't possibly control. And you have to do something with it, right? The credit bureau provides me with this huge dossier of information for making a loan decision. I have to use that data. I'm not going to be able to go back to them and tell them that they changed something. And so you have to have some process for repair.
What about, Jeremy? What do you think about would something like entity resolution, would that be something that falls under this, right? So you know how in a freaking company table, there's GE, General Electric wind turbine division, that kind of thing, or the person's name, right? So
yeah, it's funny. I think that we see that some that exists most.
Oh, by the way, there are separate startups doing just that. By the way,
for sure. Yeah. And I don't think that's a future. Okay. I think that's about the past.
Okay.
And so the reason I say that is most of those issues occur because there isn't good controls and responsive auto validation in the data entry process.
Well, and free text fields, man.
Free text fields, yeah. Or you, by all means, do free text, but then have a validation.
You know what drives me crazy is in the country, they make people type out the country name.
Yeah, it's crazy. And some of this is super legacy. I remember working with an insurance company that had a field called SIC or ZIP. And depending upon the nature of the policy, it either was the SIC code or the ZIP code. And there are some SIC codes that are the same as zip codes. Like it is not possible to tell from just one data element which one it is. Yeah. And so there's a legacy decisions about maintaining space. So I think this is a problem that will fade as more and more organizations have Web 3.0 responsive kind of intelligent forms for data entry that can prevent mistaken entry of data. So there will always be a need when you have system A and system B, and you need to join across those systems, to be able to do that entity resolution, entity matching. But I think it's a different problem for what we're focused on.
So another trend is multi-cloud.
Oh yeah.
So so not only do people have cloud warehouses or lake houses, they may have them in multiple cloud platforms, right?
Yeah, we see that some. One important thing I haven't noted is we've actually designed Anomalo, and this was one of our challenges, so that it can be run entirely in the customer's VPC. And we can still automatically update the software and remotely monitor and configure it. That way, a really data privacy, data security-centric organization has no concerns about some independent SaaS platform connecting to their data warehouse. They can run this entirely in an environment they control. And we deploy in AWS, we deploy in GCP, and so it can be in different cloud environments. In practice, I found even with the really big companies that may be multi-cloud, they're still trying to centralize all of the data into a single data warehouse. And that's I think a trend that will continue. It doesn't make sense to have multiple different data warehouses across different clouds, because then you can't join the data, and that's a fundamental limitation.
By the way, so we're starting to wrap up here, but unsupervised versus supervised in terms of data quality models. I assume most of it is unsupervised, right? Because you don't have a lot of, at least in the beginning, right? So a lot of information up front, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. So what I think about what we do is, in the most sophisticated approach, is drift detection. Drift detection in a table, right? So it's this multivariate detection of drift over time, and that is an unsupervised algorithm. No one is telling us there's drift here and there's drift not there. And so one of the ways that we early on decided to do this, we have a whole chaos engine. So it can go in and create one of 50 different flavors of chaos to data. It can happen at a specific time for a specific sample of records, with a specific where SQL clause to a specific column, right? Lots of different variants and flavors of how we go in and introduce chaos. And then what we do is we wrap this into a benchmark. And so we take hundreds of different data sets. Some of them are open source data sets, some have been contributed by customers. And then we will apply random chaos to these data sets and ask the question, is our unsupervised drift detection able to detect the entry of that chaos or not? And so we end up creating a kind of supervised learning environment, or at least a simulation environment in which we can evaluate the ground truth quality of the algorithms.
So, and in closing, so to our listeners, so here are two reasons why you might want to consider a solution like Anomalo, or generally a data quality solution, right? So first, while you can build something like this yourself, you're not specializing, and you don't have the perspective of working with different systems and different customers, different use cases. And secondly, obviously, while this is a path for you to show, create impact with your organization, assuming someone else is taking care of data quality, there are other ways for you as a data scientist or a machine learning engineer to make an impact in your organization by focusing on the actual line of business problems, right, Jeremy?
That's absolutely right. And then I think the final piece is this is going to give you a lot of time back. Every time you have a data quality issue and it disrupts an analysis and your CTO goes, I just don't believe this because this doesn't look right, or your CEO says that creates a ton of churn that's going to waste a lot of time. And anytime a machine learning model goes off the rails and you've got to do the RCA to figure out exactly why it happened, when it happened, backfill the data, that takes a ton of time. So if you can get ahead of this, you can save a lot of time. And then I think you can also ensure that you don't have an erosion of trust. And that's a real problem for these data-driven organizations is, if you have an environment where data quality is a constant thorn in the side, of any dashboard or any machine learning product, people lose their trust in that. And that's hard to regain. And so it's important to get ahead of this.
By the way, that was a great example of the CEO, because you and I probably have worked in situations where the CEO questions something and that creates a huge drama. And let's drop everything. Let's figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And I mean, if you've got a really smart data-driven CEO, they can look at a dashboard in your company and go, the physics of the world means that point cannot happen. Go figure out why. And you don't want to be the analyst on the other side of that conversation.
Right. But also, I actually, also to my first point, which is something I think a lot of, honestly, a lot of our friends here in Silicon Valley probably are guilty of, is the whole, I can build this myself. Well, yes, but you have people who are full-time dedicated to building something like this, but also, like I want to keep emphasizing, they have the perspective of having deployed this in multiple places. So they have, there's no substitute for like those battle scars, right? So,
that's right. Yeah, and I've looked at this now deployed and in use in production across companies in 15 different industries, in wildly different orders of magnitude in size and complexity. And while there are variations, some organizations, they have a lot of data that's being updated historically or updated in place. Some organizations have a lot of JSON, data and unstructured data that they care about. There are some variations, but they're small. This is a pretty general purpose problem. If you can solve it well, data appearing in these data warehouses is consistent enough that there's no reason you have to build a version that's going to be very specific to your use cases.
But also for, in your case, the reason you can solve it well is because you've accumulated lessons from many different scenarios, right? So
100%. Yeah. A huge, credit to our early customers and design partners who gave us so much feedback and said, one of my favorite examples is we have this really advanced check. You can always just drop down and write SQL that will, find bad rows in your data, and it will send you a notification. And so early on, a customer said, what I'd really like is just tell me if there are any new rows. And so we made a checkbox that says alert only if there are new rows. Little things like that, like every customer that now sees that, they're like, oh, I love that feature. And I'm like, yeah, because another customer said, it would be great if we had this.
Right. And with that, thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. It was a pleasure.